Welcome to our third series of the Sustainability Leadership Presentation Series. I'm Thomas Walker, Central Community College Grand Island Campus President, and I'm excited to be here with you today. Central Community College could not be more excited than to be partnering with Metropolitan Community College, Waste Cap, Nebraska, and Joslin Institute for Sustainable Communities to promote and broadcast this series across Nebraska. Central Community College viewers here in Grand Island, Columbus, Hastings, Holdridge, Lexington, Kearney, and Ord, wherever you are in Nebraska, we're glad to have you join us. Central Community College is committed to leading and modeling best practices in sustainability. As a signatory of the American College and University President's Climate Commitment, this series is one aspect of many of our new 3C sustainability initiatives. This program is being recorded for future reference. A couple of reminders before I introduce our speaker. If you have feedback on the Sustainability Leadership Presentation Series, please contact the CCC Sustainability Office. For all of our employees, I would like to remind you to please register online for the EMPD session. If you have any questions, please contact Corey Seatat. If you have any questions during the presentation, please tweet them to hashtag SLPS Thursday, no spaces. Enter them into the chat box in WebEx or give them to the staff person in the room to communicate to our speaker. Now, I would like to introduce to you our speaker for today, Dan McGuire. Dan lives in Lincoln but grew up on a diversified farm at Greeley, Nebraska. He is a graduate of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln with a Bachelor of Arts degree in journalism. Dan's career work has been dedicated to policies and programs that improve the rural economy through federal farm and trade policy and through renewable energy, ethanol, wind energy, and solar. His professional career positions include copywriter and account representative with the Agricultural Division of Bozell and Jacobs Incorporated in Omaha, agency director of the Nebraska Wheat Board, and executive director of the Interstate Grain Commission. Dan has served on the Nebraska Farmers Union Board of Directors for 17 years and was the 2012 National Policy Chair of the National Farmers Union Policy Committee. Dan is also the co-chair of the Nebraska Wind and Solar Conference, which Central Community College hopes you can participate in. Additionally, since 2007, Dan has been the Nebraska facilitator for the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and Wind Powering America, Wind for Schools program. He also works closely with the University of Nebraska Wind Application Center. Dan serves on the Wind Technician Advisory Committees of both Northeast Community College and Southeast Community College. Since 1999, he's been a consultant and project director of Wealth from the Wind, a national outreach and stakeholder engagement program of the American Corn Growers Foundation. Dan has carried out rural and agricultural outreach for the U.S. Department of Energy, Wind Powering America program, and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Among all this, Dan is the 2009 recipient of the U.S. Department of Energy Wind Powering America Midwest Regional Wind Advocacy Award. Welcome, Dan McGuire, and all our viewers. Thank you for coming today. We're glad you could join us.
Thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate that. Testing, you're able to hear? Well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be back here. I say back here because it just occurred to me that, in fact, it was probably sometime between 1978 and maybe 80, early 80s, and I was agency director of the Nebraska Wheat Board. In those days, there was no corn or grain sorghum board really going, And the wheat board was the real strong advocate of ethanol, gasohol as we called it in those days. And we had a project going here at this college with Jim Dutcher, and it was injecting or testing gasohol, ethanol, in an irrigation engine. And that's quite a while ago, but pardon me, you'll have to deal with my raspy voice. I have a respiratory thing going on. But it was part of the research and testing that was very useful. So look what you've been part of, the ethanol industry today, nationally and in Nebraska. So as co-chair of the Nebraska Wind and Solar Conference, I need to really encourage you to come to the 7th Nebraska Wind and Solar Conference in La Vista, October 29-30. We will have a tremendous program there for 2 days. We're going to have national speakers. We will have regional. We'll cover transmission, wind, solar, multiple tracks. You'll have public power folks from Nebraska and some federal energy officials there. So please come to that. The reason I'm co-chair of the conference comes from the other hats I wear, the Wealth from the Wind, American Corn Growers, and the NREL, Nebraska Facilitator, Wind for Schools. Now, if you look down at the lower right part of that slide, you probably think you're seeing two forms of renewable energy, sustainable forms of renewable energy. Wind, helping power an ethanol plant up in Minnesota, but you're actually seeing three, because without solar, sun, you wouldn't have either corn or wind. And so you've got three forms there. Now, when we talk about ethanol and wind energy, they have a number of things in common. And a lot of it is policy. And I've been involved in the policy arena my entire career. The two things that are parallel here are the renewable fuel standard for ethanol and the production tax credit, PTC, for wind energy. Both of them had to be passed by Congress. I remember when American Corn Growers was pushing the renewable fuel standard, we had a lot of people basically laugh and say, you'll never get that passed in Congress. But it did happen. Same on the PTC. But there are a lot of benefits that are similar. Ethanol costs less than wholesale gasoline and is the lowest transportation fuel and octane cost and octane source. Iowa State has a study out just recently that shows that 10% ethanol in the fuel supply actually keeps consumers' prices down about $1 a gallon. That is about $1,200 per household in the U.S. It extends motor fuel supplies, increases U.S. energy security, and has helped reduce U.S. oil imports from the Middle East and the Persian Gulf by 25% since 2005. That is a big national security benefit. I don't think I need to go into the details of what the Middle East for everybody to understand that. Wind energy. Improvements in technology have provided some of the lowest electric rates for 20 to 30 years, power purchase agreements. From all-time lows, according to the DOE. U.S. domestic manufacturing of wind turbine components and towers is strong, and at the end of 2012, there were over 500 U.S. manufacturing facilities building those components and 50,000 jobs at the end of 2013. And in that same year, the U.S. wind fleet reduced power sector emissions by about 96 million metric tons, or 4.4%. About like taking 17 million cars off the road in terms of emissions. And wind energy is the lowest cost and most scalable zero emissions electricity source. The 13 billion gallons of ethanol in the U.S. supports over 86,000 jobs directly and over 300,000 indirect. Actually, it's more like 500,000 because cumulatively. Ethanol increased corn prices and farm income. That helps everybody. Think about price today was $3.30 something here in Grand Island. A couple of years ago it was over $7. Imagine with this 14 billion bushel corn crop coming on, if we weren't grinding 5 billion bushels of that, what the price in ethanol, what would the price of corn be? I say it would be, Dakotas have prices at $2.50 now. Corn prices could be $1 a bushel without ethanol because there's nothing in the farm program to stop it. The 26 ethanol plants in Nebraska produce 2 billion gallons, 13% of the U.S., 1,200 jobs, $5 billion investment, and we still have all the feed value from that bushel. We get almost 3 gallons of ethanol, and we still have the distillers' grains, the protein, minerals, oils, etc. So take that same 360, buy a gallon of gasoline, what do you get? 20 miles down the road. Sure, you get more than that, but I think you get my point. Wind energy uses no water. It enhances our economic security. A 200 megawatt wind farm generates about $1.3 million annually in property taxes, and it provides $800,000 to $1 million in annual lease payments. Nebraska is going to have about 1,206 megawatts installed by the end of 2015. Now, I'm not going to go through all these details on all these slides, but wind provides about 5.3%. This is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission recent slide. Coal is 28.5, natural gas, and this is electric generation, 42, nuclear 9.2. But when we talk about policy, we have to talk about incentives or subsidies, and I always get a kick out of it. I've had people come to me over the years on both ethanol and wind and say, yeah, Dan, these are great, but doggone it, if they just didn't need those subsidies. And I say, well, now, you mean those subsidies like coal and oil and those energy forms have been getting for about 100 years. Well, that changes the nature of the discussion pretty fast. This slide shows that oil and some of the fossil fuels have been getting subsidies since, about 1916. Renewables are newer on the scene. Pardon me, to keep it in perspective, in 2007, the dark bar at the top is fossil, down at the bottom the blue is renewables. There's other forms of policy at the state level, net metering. Now, Nebraska, you can see there's 43 states have net metering. Nebraska has 25 kilowatts. Some of us would like to see that be increased. But that is another state policy. Nebraska is a 100% public power state, and public power has been very good for Nebraska. Some of the lowest rates over the years, but public power does not qualify for the federal production tax credit. Only private wind farms can get that. So they're built in Nebraska, and then they sell the power to NPPD, OPPD, etc. This latest report from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab says the availability of the incentives, and that's the PTC, which expired December 31st. The availability is a market driver. Now, if projects were started by the end of 2013 and had about 10% of their cost invested already, then they can be built in 2014, 2015. So that's a big deal, policy. You'll hear me talk about policy quite a bit. Cost of new generation is a key driver. You see at the top two bars on this slide, two forms of natural gas. They're about the cheapest. Further down is hydro. It is absolutely the cheapest. But land-based wind is right there with natural gas. Third one down. What about our wind power capacity installations? Well, the top 16 states, Texas is number 1. Nebraska is not there. They're number 18, I believe. But we have some states bordering us. Iowa on this list, Iowa, Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming. Nebraska is mentioned down here at the lower right, and that's because Nebraska installed or had a 201 megawatt project go online in the second quarter of this year. So how did we get wind energy going in Nebraska? American Corn Growers launched a program called Wealth from the Wind back in 99, 2000. And that was about stakeholder engagement, outreach, and so forth. The guy in the upper left there on that slide is Dan McGuire from Woodstock, Minnesota. And that day I was up there with a group from Iowa, bankers and landowners that were trying to find out just exactly what was this all about, all this, the wind development. Now, we learned a lot from Mr. Jewell. I like to give credit where credit is due. And so we've been at it since then in terms of outreach and promotion. The lower slide is this year's Wind Power Conference in Las Vegas. I've been at every national conference since 2002. And I'm sitting next to Tom Kiernan, the CEO of the American Wind Energy Association. And next to him is John O'Connor with NPPD. Standing behind him, Dean Mueller with OPPD, and Christine Bywater with OPPD. Well, you might say we had Tom surrounded, and we were going to convince him to be a keynote speaker at our 2014 conference, and he agreed. So if you come to the conference, you'll get to hear him as our first keynote. I believe the governor will open the conference again, so it'll probably be after that. But he points out that this industry has rocketed onto the mainstream energy landscape with 61,000 megawatts now installed in the U.S. And the cost of wind energy has fallen an impressive 43%. But you know, we had a lot, we wanted to survey farmers. We didn't want to just take our word for it that wind energy was good. We wanted to know we were in step with the majority of corn farmers. So we did a number of professional surveys, had a firm up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota do it, surveying over 500 farmers in the 14 states, representing about 90% of the corn. And 88% that year said they supported wind energy. Down at the bottom, that note points out that NPPD did a deliberative poll in 03. They found very strong support, 96%. They did it right here in Grand Island. And 96% wanted them to build more wind power. University of Nebraska rural polls over the years, a number of times have shown similar results to ours. And in 03, we found 93% support, and they wanted, about 89% wanted farmers, industry, and public institutions, I'd say that includes community colleges, to advocate wind power. They also wanted utilities to accept it, and they supported the energy title in the Farm Bill, which has helped a lot of smaller energy projects on the farm. And they wanted the country to become more energy independent, and Congress and the administration to use wind to do it. They wanted rural electric co-ops to support and promote wind energy, and they wanted action on transmission, upgrade the grid, the infrastructure, what I refer to as the farm-to-market road for those wind-generated electrons, the new cash crop. But we had a lot to learn. You just don't dive into wind energy without doing your research. And this guy, Dan McGuire, up at Woodstock, Minnesota, and that's him there that day with the chairman, Gail Lush from Wilcox, Nebraska, chairman of the American Corn Growers, and his brother, Ron. Mike Alberts down the road here at Marquette. Then I think he was chairman of the ethanol board. He served on that board for a lot of years. But Dan McGuire explained to us that those wind turbine generators were like a combine harvesting a new cash crop 300 feet in the air. But there was a lot more to it than that. He had to take us through explaining everything from power purchase agreements to generation interconnection agreements to pro formas, equity partners, how do you develop a project, how you finding developers, getting bankers involved, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think, frankly, I can say that Nebraska would be anywhere close to where we are without him. We convinced him to come down to Nebraska and inform and educate farm leaders. Gary Lesh and I serve on the Farmers Union Board, and we were able to convince them to get involved, and Dan Jewell to speak at the conventions and to talk to our legislators. And we also took a number of them up to his wind farm. I took Southeast Community College students up there as well, and a whole lot of other folks to get a first-hand look up at the Buffalo Ridge wind development. There's a lot going on up there. So he did come down. We found out that only public power could build generation unless we changed the law. So in 2007, Cap Dirks, senator from Ewing, had gone up to meet with Mr. Jewell. He introduced LB 629. Took us 4 years to get there, but in 07, the legislature passed it 49-0. And those photos there, the upper left is co-sponsors, Senators Preister, McDonald, Dubas, Wallman, Lathrop, and Karpachek. There with the governor signing the bill. And in the lower left is the coalition of groups, American Corn Growers, the Nebraska Farmers Union, Center for Rural Affairs, Sierra Club, Wildlife Federation, Nebraska Power Association is there, NPPD folks are there. There's a lot of folks there. The lower right slide or photo is last year at a wind conference, we presented the first Dirks Preister Wind Pioneer Award to senators, ex-senators, former senators, Don Preister and Cap Dirks, and they sure deserved it for all the great work they did. But our policy success, our program, Wealth from the Wind, American Corn Growers, was national. So they saw what we had achieved in Nebraska around the country, and I was invited to speak at a lot of different places. That photo there is up in Augusta, Maine, and did 4 workshops up there. Went over to the Capitol and handed a copy of the Nebraska law that had been passed in 07 to Speaker Pingree. She was the Speaker of the House then. She introduced a bill, or got a bill introduced. They passed it. Now they get 7.4% of their electricity from wind. So what's it look like in the U.S. capacity growth? Well, since 01, we've gone up to almost 62,000 megawatts in the U.S. as of 2014. That's pretty good growth trend. We do lag behind other countries in wind as a percentage of electricity. There's about a dozen countries, most Europe, ahead of the U.S. You can see where the circle is. That's the U.S. But we're making progress. You know, it's not just about rural economic development, which has been my focus for 40 years, but or renewable energy. It's about jobs. These 500 plus manufacturing facilities are all over the country. So it impacts careers and work everywhere. It's a big deal. Domestic U.S. content has grown steadily. If I had 2013 on that slide, it would say 70%. And frankly, I love to see that because I've never been one of those guys that supported that free trade, globalization, outsourcing. So this is a very good trend. Nebraska does have world-class wind. We're rated number 3 in terms of our resource, number 18 in terms of percent of electricity from wind. We had 16 projects actually announced or over the years. I think there's 13 now that's operating. The one up top one there was retired. It's been replaced. So I think maybe it's 13 now or so. But 1,207 megawatts total by the end of 2015 have been announced in terms of total. And, you know, about 1,140 of those megawatts come from projects that were built after we passed the law in 2007. 9 states have over 10%. Some have over 20. Our bordering states, Wyoming 8.4, South Dakota 26%, Colorado almost 14, Kansas 19.4. Iowa is quite a story there. 27.4, but Mid-American Energy, which is owned by Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's company, they get about 33%. Now, their CEO, I met with him a year ago. driving back from Illinois at his headquarters in Des Moines, Bill Furman. We were meeting about an Iowa project, but he used to be the NPPD CEO. He was there at NPPD when we were working on the wind energy law at that time, and worked with him from about 2003. And the folks at NPPD are great to work with, the ones that are there now as well. But you can see what other states are doing. Nebraska has 4.8%. I guess you could look at that and say we have a lot of upside potential. Environmental benefits. U.S. Department of Energy did a study in 2008, 20% vision, 20% by 2030. And they looked at the environmental benefits. No SOx, sulfur dioxide, NOx, nitrous oxide, or particulates like come out of the smokestacks, or mercury, which also does, and that gets into the lakes and streams, and we hear about that in fish and people not eating it, fish that have been tested for that. And no CO2, greenhouse gas, no water for generation. So that trend line would look like this. If we hit the 20% vision by 2030, 825 million metric tons of CO2 would be avoided annually, and 7,600 million metric tons cumulatively. This is what the trend line would look like. The blue line at the top is business as usual, no new wind after 06. The gold line is the 20% vision. Very busy slide here. It's Union that concerns scientists. Water use. There's a number of different types of water cooling systems and power plants. One's through cooling ponds, recirculating, etc. But I think the main point is that thermoelectric power plants consume 2.8 billion to 5.9 billion gallons every day. So that's fresh water supplies from streams and so on. Savings in water. Well, we would, as you might expect, the higher population areas of the country, the dark blue would reflect if you had 20% wind, they'd have bigger water savings because they obviously have more power plants because they have bigger loads and more population. But it's a big deal all over the country in terms of savings. 20% saves 4 trillion gallons of water. Through 2030, it's about 17%. And I know we can look at Nebraska this year and it's a garden. I've been all the way across the sandhills, and I'll tell you what, I have a hunch the cattlemen have a tough time finding those young calves out there. The grass is that tall. But think about what you read or see on the news. California, the West, Southwest, they are really having a tough time with their water issues. And frankly, they will be looking at this area here for a potential source of water because it's been looked at before. Water is precious. Everything we can do to save it is a good thing. But don't worry, I'm not going to read all of this stuff. But these are zoning regulations. I picked Knox County because it had the first project after the 07 law, which was Elkhorn Ridge. This just gives you some definitions, and some counties have them, some don't. But they define what's involved in a wind project, like aggregate project to wind energy conversion system above 100 kilowatts, fall zone, met towers, rotor diameter, total height, tower defined, and so on, and wind turbine defined. This spreadsheet on the left shows the residential, non-commercial. Maybe on your rural home you have a wind turbine or solar or something, and so or in this case wind, but setbacks. And then the big projects in the middle there, those are for setbacks. And then the Met Towers. Well, Met Towers are needed because bankers and equity partners want to know a couple of years of wind speed data before they invest in a project. So sometimes Met Towers go up a couple of years ahead. This is just a schematic that they provide showing the various layouts and what they mean when they talk about setbacks and blades, the tip of the blade at the peak, and other things. They want the legal names of the owners and the descriptions of the land, site layouts, engineered certificates, latitude, longitude, USGS, geological survey maps, and wetlands, acoustical analysis, communication towers, get into the color and the finish of the machines, the lighting, signage, feeder lines, waste disposal, whether it's hydraulic fluid or crates or whatever it may be. Decommissioning. If the project shuts down 25, 30 years later, you have to take the land back down to the way it was, 4 feet depth before you ever started the project. Noise and decibel levels are dealt with. Interference, county roads. If you mess up a county road building the project, you got to restore it. The project does. They have to pay for that. Drainage system, permit fees. Now, if the wind generator is like a combine harvesting up 300 feet, then I think the substation is like a grain elevator, country grain elevator, because it's collecting all of that electricity from the project and moving it on down the farm-to-market road to the ultimate consumer. This was the substation for the Bloomfield Elkhorn Ridge project, and these folks were looking at another substation for the Crofton project. Elkhorn Ridge, 80 megawatt wind farm north of Bloomfield. This is what it would look like. 4,000 acres, start up in the upper right at northeast, drop off to the lower left, southwest to the substation. Those are all where the locations are. How long does it take? Well, in that project, started March of 07, initial meetings and so on. After they got the power purchase agreement with NPPD, then by 2008, they had to be up and running. And I say they had to be because the production tax credit expired that year also. So they had to be up and running in order to qualify for it. IRS has tweaked those rules a bit since then. They built another project. This was, and these slides have been used at our state wind conferences as well. But the Laredo Ridge project, and there they were looking at this simply shows buildable areas, landowner approving locations, microwave beam paths, etc. They have to look at a lot of things. Nebraska has the most center pivot irrigation in the country, 72% irrigated land. They can't always miss a pivot circle. They can't always put the tower outside of the circle. So when they do have to have that situation, they have to mitigate those economic challenges with the local landowner. Large transportation equipment is involved in these projects. It's all part of the big economic impact. I'm just going to run through a few text slides that on a 52 turbine project, you'd have 520 oversized overweight trucks. These are things for county superintendents and engineers to be thinking about on their county roads. The gravel for a 1,500 feet long and 32 foot wide access road, 15 inches deep, 11 to 12,000 trips. So a lot of activity going on out there. Reinforcing steel and all the things that go with the substation, 30 to 50 trucks. Show you a few slides so you can see what it looks like. This is the Elkhorn Ridge project getting ready for the first foundation. 40 trips concrete for the foundation. A lot of, again, this slide just talks more. People, when they look at this later, can see the more detail, the descriptions of all these vehicles. I'll just mention here, this spreadsheet shows some of the sizes of the big equipment that goes in. Taking the blade in, 5-axle double drop, 160 feet long and 45,000 feet. The nacelle, that's like the big compartment that sets up at the top that holds the generator. 11 axle, low profile, 160 feet, but 200,000 pounds. Engineers and superintendents have to look at the type of roads. These things are not just go in, build a road, and drag all the equipment in. This is very technical stuff. They have to do things according to spec, and here's a type A road specified. This is what that nacelle looks like on that big long semi. Just to give you a schematic of what that would be. The site layout, this inside the circle here is the big crane. They set it up in a very efficient staging type area where they reach around, pick up the tower units, able to pick up the blades, pick up the nacelle in that sweep, and it all goes up. This is the concrete being poured at the end where the base ring for the first tower is going to go down. Before that, they're laying down rebar on that concrete. They're bringing it up to that level to put on that first base tower ring, and that's what it looks like before they put the base ring on. You can see the conduit coming out of there that'll be carrying electricity and communication, etc. As you know, county roads, country roads are not always easy to navigate, and those trucks can't always manage it without a little assist, in this case from a payloader. Here's one of the big tower units being brought in. Here's a blade coming in, staging area with the crane. Here they are putting that first tower base down on the base ring. the nacelle going up on top. This is where the generator is housed. Here's where the blade hub, the rotor hub goes on in position there. First blade on, last blade going on. It takes about a year for one of these projects, 2,500 man-hours to construct each turbine, 1.25 full-time jobs, 18 semis to bring in the crane, just the crane. Foundation, 60 to 80 cement trucks, full-time job per every 10 megawatts, and that Elkhorn Ridge project of 80 megawatts provided enough electricity for 24,000 homes. They put on V90 Vestas machines. Vestas, one of the oldest wind turbine manufacturers in the world. 3 megawatts. Well, what's that mean? It's about one of the biggest land-based wind turbines. Weight is a limiting factor in how large you can go. I know they do have 4 megawatt machines now, and even bigger, offshore 7 and bigger than that. And they talk about bigger than 4 megawatts. I think there's a couple of them being tested in the U.S. of that size. But this was a 3. For instance, a number of the projects going in Nebraska now have 1.65 GE machines in them. This is almost twice that size. So this was a very big project. From the ground up to the tip of the blade at the peak, 410 feet. That project cost $135 million, $5.2 million in property taxes. For those companies that were involved locally in the construction, might have been concrete, steel, electric cable. Then you had legal services, engineering, construction, 135 construction jobs, 8 permanent full-time jobs. So you might say, well, why do farmers, rural business leaders, and so on support wind? Here's a couple of testimonials. Upper left, Wyoming rancher said, we've been ranching for generations. Leasing the land to wind power helps us carry on that tradition. Farmer in Iowa said, leasing the land to wind power helps keep our family farm in the black. I'll bet they're thinking more about that with $3 corn than they were with $7.50. Lower left, that businessman said local wind farm really energized his business, and the school there in Utah, wind power is showing my high school students the sky is the limit. Going to talk about a couple of projects in nearby states. This was the Junction Hilltop, Iowa project in Iowa. 5 machines, 1.5 megawatt GEs, 7.5 megawatts. 2 local farmers, 7 relatives went together. They sold the power to Alliant. That's not public power. That's an independently owned utility. $16.5 million total cost. That's when stimulus, Treasury 1603 payments were involved. New market tax credit, state of Iowa loans. Iowa is a very wind-friendly state. It does things to facilitate wind, and as this slide, I need to acknowledge Larry Flowers from the American Wind Energy Association used these slides last year at our conference. But he makes the point there in red, challenges, minimal. This is Iowa. And he makes a very good point. Minnesota project, back in 06, and I've been up to that project, 8 1.25 Suzlons, 10 megawatt total. Minnesota flip. Well, that simply means that because the equity partners that bring about 99% of the money to the table to build a project take 89 or 99% of the production tax credit. That's why they come to the table. But in that model, and the local owners had 1%. Now in that model, after 10 years, when the PTC is gone, ownership goes 90% local and 10%. So that's the whole strategy of getting the resources to the table to build a project that'll be locally owned. And that's how that works. That was a $40 per megawatt hour, 4 cents a kilowatt PPA value, but there was also a Minnesota state production incentive of $15 a megawatt hour, 1.5 cents. That's similar to the PTC. I mean, it's a state level type PTC. Challenges, finding tax equity partners that are willing to share. Well, what's that mean? They look at investor rate of returns. Maybe they're Wall Street guys, who knows where they're coming from, international bankers. And, share. Well, give the local folks a reasonable share of that investor rate of return. And take your fair share of the risk. That's what I view as an equitable thing. So that's not just a Minnesota issue. Anybody trying to build a project, I don't care if it's Nebraska or anywhere else where you're going to have local ownership, you're going to be dealing with some of these same issues because you're trying to bring in large sums of funds. So That's the point I make on that. Colorado had a piggyback model. It was the first in the country, and what that means is there was a 162 megawatt Colorado Green project going in, big developer, going to make that project. And the local folks said, hey, what if we talk to those guys and see if we can have a couple of wind turbines ourselves here in this, and then we'd own them here and be part of the ownership and get the economies of scale with all that big equipment and have them order our turbines for 162 megawatts, add ours on, and we get a cheaper rate. Well, they did that. Lamar Light and Power had 3 wind turbines, and Arkansas River Power and Light had 1. So that was a good way for the developer to have goodwill with the community and for the community out at Lamar to be able to be part of the project also. Colorado has the National Renewable Energy Lab, and they are very fortunate. Those folks do tremendous work out there. So they did, and this is a Larry Flower slide too, they said, where do we get the biggest economic bang for the buck from? Coal, gas, wind. Well, they looked at it and they said, well, coal, let's see. We don't have coal. We import all our coal from Powder River Basin in Wyoming. Nebraska does that too. Gas, well, they have 40% in Colorado that they produce. And so they looked at all these different things, taxes, landowner revenue, fuel, O&M, and construction. Well, there was no landowner revenue for either coal or gas. There was with wind because they leased the land in Colorado. So Colorado, they did this study. Colorado, the wind showed the most economic local impact for them. National Renewable Energy Lab has a jobs and economic development impact model called JEDI. We had them do a Nebraska analysis for us after we got the seabed law passed. And that, I'm not going to try to drill down on all that information. I'll just tell you that I enlarged that spreadsheet, and what it shows is we said look at a low seabed, meaning low ownership, of 1,000 megawatts in Nebraska, or high ownership of 1,000 megawatts in Nebraska. And the lifetime economic output, $868 million for low ownership, high ownership, $1,640 million, about double. Why? Well, think about it. When you have $7 corn and cattle at good prices, what do farmers do and landowners do when they make money? They spend it locally. They build things. They buy things. They get new equipment. They do a lot of things, as do the other folks that are involved in agriculture. And so the multiplier effect is a very real thing, $2 to $4 multiplier, depending on whose study you look at. So that's why local ownership matters. It's a big deal. So the update on the 20% vision was just in July. Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and DOE put this out and said U.S. is on early trajectory that may lead to 20% wind. Projections for 2014 to 16, however, fall short. And, you can see in the bar graph there, that blue line, that line is the deployment path to 20%. The red line shows actual installations up to 2013. And it's on track, but there's a number of things. Policy uncertainty. How are we doing on the farm to market road? Well, transmission barriers have been overcome. 3,500 circuit miles of new transmission in 2013. And FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, continues to implement Order 1000. It's a very big deal. Public policy again, requiring public utility transmission providers to improve planning processes and determine the cost allocation methodology for new transmission investments. So what about 2013? We had 5,670 new megawatts of power purchase agreements in the country. And what about Nebraska? Well, OPBD, 600 megawatts of new projects. You can see it on the map there in the center, OPBD 400, OPBD 200. NPBD added 75 megawatts. And I mentioned Lincoln Electric System up there, 100 megawatts. Well, you have to go down into Oklahoma to find that project. It's in the Arbuckle Hills in Oklahoma, LES. And so at the same time, we have laws to export that facilitate exporting wind-generated electricity. We're going to import 100 megawatts for Lincoln Electric System. Well, you say, why in the world did we do that? Well, I don't know all the details, but I do know this. Oklahoma has a state level incentive production, like I mentioned, Minnesota does, and some of the others. I believe that probably had a fair amount to do with it in terms of driving the business down there. I don't know, but if you have, you know, a 1.5 cent or 1.2 or whatever it is, I'm not sure what they have. That's a big deal per kilowatt when you're talking about electric generation. That can be the difference in a project. I don't know what the reasons were, but I have a hunch that played some role. Nebraska is part of the Southwest Power Pool. That's an RTO, a regional transmission organization, and the area there in yellow shows you that where that is. This slide is showing proposed transmission expansion in and around the Southwest Power Pool, and up from Sutherland in Nebraska, that red and yellowish red with little yellow bars in it, goes north and then cuts east through the Sand Hills, the R project. And it is that would be very good for wind development up in that part of the state. But you can see all the transmission going on here and proposed. This is another map similar, but I put this in because it mentions the clean line. Well, those are being built by private sector individuals, private entities that are building those lines. And look into Kansas, southern Kansas, and Oklahoma, northern Oklahoma, and you see those lines going straight east. They're kind of a bluish, greenish looking line with red in them. Those are going to carry wind-generated electricity over to population centers and load centers further east. Southwest Power Pool has almost 27,000 megawatts in service and being developed. Includes wind in the generation interconnection queue with executed interconnection agreements. You want to build a wind project in Nebraska, you are going to have your developer, whoever it is and wherever you're going, in addition to getting a power purchase agreement from a utility in Nebraska, and an interconnection generation agreement, you're going to have to go to the Southwest Power Pool and apply. It's going to cost quite a bit of money to get in the queue because there's going to be a whole bunch of people ahead of you in that queue that are proposing projects. And it's not just in the Southwest Power Pool. This one slide shows nationally. There's queues in position. The blue bars are 2013 added, and green is the cumulative. Natural gas, wind, solar, nuclear, coal, and other. And so you can see there's 13 gigawatts of capacity under construction after the first quarter of 2014. A lot going on. This was a panel we had last year at our 2013 Wind Conference. The moderator is Ginger Wilson, our own Nebraska Energy Office Director. Milo Mumgard is sitting there next to her at the table, and he's with the City of Lincoln Mayor's Office. And they're very big on renewable energy as well. Larry Flowers is speaking, American Wind Energy Association. He's pointing out the ripple effects of a project and the industry, project development, construction, management, administrative, legal, and siting, the local revenues and supply chain impacts, everything from blades and towers to banking and finance to hardware stores. You know, when those Crofton and Broken Bow and projects all over the state were built, local store clerks, retail, child care providers. There's all kinds of benefits involved. Now you're going to get a break from me and my voice and slides, and we're going to look at what is a video of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, which I call one of the jewels in our national crown on energy, renewable energy.
It is a beautiful location.
This land is one of extremes.
The highest speeds we've ever had out here are in the 140 mile an hour plus range.
When it comes to the wind,
We get the really high wind events from the west during the October through May period, and then we get the really slower, more lazy, if you want to call it that, winds that occur in the Great Plains, but are very steady normally.
the gentle breezes that roll in from the east and the strong gusts that sweep through El Dorado Canyon make this site just south of Boulder, Colorado, ideal for research.
2 over here, 2 here.
Engineers with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL,
My name is Jim Johnson.
work in the shadows of these often massive machines.
This is about an 80-foot tall tower.
They believe the answer to many of our country's energy and environmental concerns is literally blowing in the wind.
Right now, wind is in high demand.
The goal is to really make wind-generated electricity kind of the cheapest form of energy on the planet.
Robert Thresher leads NREL's National Wind Technology Center about 20 miles north of NREL's main campus. He says wind power makes up less than 1% of the electricity in the United States. His team is working with wind turbine developers to change that.
The wind could supply up to 20% of the nation's electrical needs.
It'll take machines that perform better, last longer, and cost less.
20 years ago, wind-generated electricity cost about 40 cents a kilowatt hour, whereas today it costs from about 5 to 8 cents a kilowatt hour, depending on the site you're at.
The goal is about 3 cents a kilowatt hour. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory is rising to the challenge, designing and testing wind turbines of all sizes.
I happen to think they're beautiful.
Engineers evaluate everything from the smaller residential wind machines to utility-scale turbines that truly tower over the land.
Diameters that are large enough to fly a 747 through with 40 feet of extra space on either side of the diameter.
To make sure they stand the test of time.
It has to operate pretty flawlessly for about 20 years.
It doesn't take decades to assess the reliability of these machines. Here, the lifespan of a turbine is tested in months.
This is what we call the industrial user facility. It's designed to be able to do wind turbine blade testing.
Engineers bend the blades.
The tip is nearly touching the floor and almost touching the ceiling when it's deflecting.
Even break them both inside and sometimes partially outside this building.
You're only seeing about the first 30 meters of it because the other 15 or 20 meters is outside the building.
It is spectacular to see.
We're one of maybe 4 or 5 labs in the world that can do this, the only one in the United States. It was designed to be able to accommodate 2, maybe 3 different manufacturers at the same time and keep their information and hardware segregated.
This is the control room for the dynamometer test facilities.
The wind turbine drivetrains are put through equally rigorous trials.
So the drivetrain consists of this main shaft, the gearbox, the generator, and then the system that converts that electricity back onto the grid.
So we're simulating the wind mechanically.
Industry partners use the information to iron out problems with their prototypes. The innovations of the future are generated here. The next frontier takes the wind turbines into the water. It's already a reality in Europe.
When we look at the potential for offshore, it's enormous.
28 states border a coastline.
Inside those 28 states, we use 78% of the electricity in the nation.
All of the wind sites in the U.S. are on land, and moving electricity isn't easy when the system is more than a century old.
It doesn't do a good job of being able to take that resource in the center part of the country and move the electricity to where the loads are. That's our biggest obstacle in wind energy in the United States right now.
Water isn't the only uncharted territory.
To reduce the cost for land-based systems, to go into lower and lower wind speed regions.
NREL is developing turbines to create electricity where the wind just isn't as strong.
There's 20 times more lower wind speed sites throughout the Great Plains than there are the higher wind speed sites.
Expectations are high. The turbine towers are taller than ever to tap into the rich winds at greater altitudes.
Every time I try to guess where the maximum size of a machine will be, I'm always wrong. It keeps growing and growing.
The machines are more powerful, they produce more energy. That means fewer, for example, on the land of a rancher or farmer helping to harvest the wind.
He gets a $200,000 a year income from those 100+ machines on his property.
Cultivating low-cost renewable energy.
Then you can be a good citizen and be green and clean.
NREL's National Wind Technology Center is pioneering the field to harness the power of nature.
It's really a great challenge. It's been a great challenge, and it's a great joy to see it going out and being used.
and that is a little bit outdated. It's a few years old, and some of the folks, some of the people that are shown here probably are not there, maybe, but and the numbers are maybe a little outdated, but the message is the same. It's a very, very important facility, and Colorado's lucky to have it. We're lucky to have it nearby. Thank you. So when you look at this slide, it talks about pricing, and Bob Thresher on that video just talked about pricing and their job of getting the cost down. Well, look at this. I'd say they're doing a good job. The blue bars are nationwide. I'm not running the technician stuff, or we'd be in the dark. Blue bars are nationwide trends on electric costs. Then regionally, you look at those different colors, but that dark blue line going through the blue bars, that's the interior. He talked about getting the cost down 3 cents, down 2, 3. This is almost to 2, between 2 and 3 cents in 2013. This is another line graph that shows projections out to almost, well, to 2040 on natural gas in the gray area, their projections, and the dark line in the center. And it's just that, a projection. They can't really determine what the prices are going to be, but economists project on everything like this. And so those three broken lines, the top one is 2011 power purchase agreements. The next one is 2012, and they are 25-year contracts, so they extend on out there. But look at the brown one down there at the bottom. It's down there around a little over 2 cents. So I'd say NREL and their work has done quite a bit of good. Now, I always go back to talking policy and subsidies because it's such a big deal in the energy industry. And so there's all kinds of different types: risk and safety, cleanup, production, development, extraction, exploration, research and development. Well, fossil fuels in 06 there had all of those. And the thing you need to remember about fossil fuels, oil and some of those, there's, as Senator Charles Grassley recently said from Iowa, they're permanent in the tax code. Wind energy, PTC, is on again, off again. They let it expire. The renewable fuel standard for ethanol is under attack. Well, here, nuclear was getting 3 of those subsidies, and wind was getting 2. R&D, the little thin blue line down at the bottom, and the purple line is production. That means the PTC, Federal Production Tax Credit. And just so you know, we're not just making up these charts. These come from the American Wind Energy Association. These are all the sources of data, all the federal agencies and so forth that record that, official sources of data on this slide. So the Lawrence Berkeley report concludes that wind additions in 2013 were modest, but growth after 2015 remains uncertain, dictated in part by natural gas fossil. Maybe they'll be retiring some of the old coal plants, and then policy and technology. So I always like to look at well, people say, well, you know, wind needs to learn how to get along without the PTC on their own. I say, well, when oil and coal are ready to, then let's talk about that. But what's it look like without the PTC? Well, without it, there's very little manufacturing. With it, there's 500 American facilities. Without it, 2,500 workers. With it, 30,000 workers. Without the PTC, less than 25% domestic content. With it, about 70% now. Without the PTC, $7 billion in private investment. With it, over $100 billion. There's been a sharp decline in wind-related imports, and there are stable exports. That's good news. We're exporting some of this material. That's good for our manufacturing. And I'm all about exports rather than imports and domestic content. Jobs, jobs, jobs. We hear politicians talk about that all the time, and it's worth talking about. The U.S. has lost so much of its industrial manufacturing during this since the 80s, outsourcing and shipping jobs overseas to low-wage areas and then bringing the cheap stuff back in. Well, wind energy can help reindustrialize the country. And all these jobs, I've mentioned them before, but truck driving and management and siting. You know, when I think about heavy industry, and I worked construction, Interstate 29, when I was in college, and so I think about Peter Kiewit in Omaha as a big construction company, and I think about Deere Works over in the Quad Cities, Illinois and Iowa. And Governor Terry Branstad just said a couple of weeks ago, because the federal renewable fuel standard was in uncertain sort of decisions hadn't been made, 400 workers were laid off at Deere because they were worried about farm income from ethanol. When I think about agriculture, it's heavy industry. It's manufacturing. J.I. Case, New Holland, right here in Grand Island, these other facilities that have been here over the years. All of our irrigation companies here in this state, processing facilities. So wind energy fits right in there with those. That's how I see it. Steel mill jobs are part of it. Services, equipment, blades and towers, taxes, finance, and so on. Here's a couple of examples. The left slide there is Honda transmission plant, Russell Point, Ohio. They put up 2 wind turbines on their property to generate about 10% of their electricity. By the way, Mr. Jewell that I mentioned earlier was part of that project. And this vice president of Honda, this is Honda Automobiles, vice president of Honda is saying that they're glad they could help reduce CO2 emissions. The other slide is Anheuser-Busch out in California. There's a number of these companies that are starting to put their own wind turbines. If you have your own machine on your property and you're offsetting the retail value of those kilowatts, that's quite a bit different than selling it at wholesale. That, you know, you're offsetting maybe 10 cents a kilowatt hour right there on your own property. So that's why they're looking at this. Industry is looking at this. If you look at the far right slide here, 2013, the sort of goldish, whatever color that is on the bottom is imports. And that's right at 30%. The blue bar is domestic content. And that is, again, U.S. manufacturing, U.S. jobs. What about impact on property taxes? Well, Blue Stem Energy Solutions and Baird Home Attorneys in Omaha, this is not, I'm not giving you a scoop on anything here. This has already been published in Nebraska during the last year, but they determined a 200 megawatt wind farm generates about $1.3 million in property taxes annually in some Nebraska counties, rural counties. The addition of a wind farm of this size could increase property tax revenue by approximately 39%. Well, that can take the pressure off other property owners, you know, wrong with that. Nebraska can continue to grow with renewable sustainable energy. I like to show the ethanol pump and the products that come off that ethanol plant down there at the lower level, the small wind turbine helping power the grain drying system, the solar panels down there, they're helping power a center pivot irrigation system up in northeast Nebraska, and then the commercial scale utility project. Secretary of Energy, Ernest Moniz, said as a readily expandable domestic source of clean renewable energy, wind power is paving the way to low carbon future. And he points out keeping wind manufacturing and jobs in the U.S. So NREL, Larry Flowers was there at the time, also came up with another program called Wind for Schools. Nebraska was a priority state, and the purpose was engage rural school teachers and students in wind energy education, equip college students with wind applications and education to provide interested and equipped engineers for the growing U.S. wind industry, and introduce wind energy to rural communities, initiating a discussion of wind energy benefits and challenges. Now, I always thought it was such a great program because I thought one of those K-12 students out there might come up with the latest gee whiz idea for the new power electronics or something, come up with a new design. So I was the facilitator for this program in Nebraska. Started in 07. And how do we get the word out? Well, National Association of Farm Broadcasting. We didn't go out and solicit schools. Schools had to come to us. We got the word out publicly. And KRVN Radio interviewed me a number of times. We had a booth, American Corn Growers Foundation, at Husker Harvest Days for a lot of years, and we had wind energy, including Wind for Schools information. And then at our And by the way, at that Husker Harvest Days booth, one of the schools I'm going to mention later, or more than one of them, came there, heard it on the radio, came there, got the information, took it back to their school and became a partner school. And then we had the annual wind conference where we had a booth. Unless something has happened that I don't know about, Nebraska is still the lead state with the most K-12 partner schools, 25. And Dr. Jerry Hudgens, professor, chair of the electrical engineering at the University of Nebraska and director of their Wind Application Center, I worked very closely with them. And by the way, the community colleges also have wind turbines. I'm going to talk a little more about that later. But so these are where the schools are located. I'm going to run through them quick. Their leaders, I think they deserve a shout out here. Hastings Public Schools, that's Trent Kelly. It's right over the overpass as you go down on the west side of the road. The wind turbine is there. Hayes Center was one of our first public schools or one of the first 4 schools. Superintendent Ron Howard down there on the left. Jerry Hudgens and I talking to Kate Rapace, superintendent up there in 08. You can see the turbine through the goalposts and above the scoreboard. By the way, Southwest Public Power out there worked very good with us on that project, and we're very much involved. Garden County Public Schools at Oshkosh, science teacher Sarah Paisley, and monitoring the data logging. It transmits the data from the turbine. And by the way, these turbines were never intended to generate a lot of electricity for the school. It wasn't about that. It was about education, curriculum, career development. And so there's the science class out there under the sky stream, and there she is in their greenhouse that they were just getting going to be powered by that sky stream. Kimball Public installed theirs in December of 2012. Crawford in the far northwest. There's the science class out there, and Northwest Rural Public Power provided that mobile solar trailer, and that was interconnected in there as well. Hyannis in the Sandhills, science instructor Joey Brown and her assistant there, they do a great job incorporating that into their science curriculum and classes, and the class out underneath the sky stream. Mullen Public Schools down the road a little ways, and Sarah Harden, their science teacher, and the class out there. West Holt at Atkinson, you can see the sky stream over the roof below the stadium lights. Pleasanton High School Industrial Arts instructor Randy Bauer and their science teacher do a great job down there. That middle photo is Attorney General John Bruning presenting a check for a grant for that wind project, and I have to tip of the hat to Attorney General Bruning and his staff. It's called Supplemental Environmental Program. They administer it, and it fit very nicely with the mission of the wind. That mission and the Wind for Schools is about education, environment, the SEP program. And this was about that too. And they provided funding for a dozen of our schools that were in this program, so thanks to them. Cedar Rapids was the second school. I believe if I read something, they may have changed their name to Riverside. I'm not sure if that's correct or not. But anyway, Cedar Rapids Public Schools. I may not be reading that right, but Cedar Rapids Public Schools was the second one to install wind turbine. And Loop Public Power, I tell you, they picked the windiest day of 2008 to install that machine, and Loop Public Power was out there, did a great job, and have been a really super partner up there to work with. And just north of when I was driving from Cedar Rapids up to Tilden, I looked to the west at, I think it's the Petersburg project, and here are the wind turbines up on the hill, generating wind energy, cash crop. Here's the center pivot down there in the foreground, which I assume might have been raising corn this year for another renewable energy, ethanol. And it was just an interesting scene. Elkhorn Valley at Tilden was the very first school in Nebraska to become a partner. Lower right there, Superintendent Lecron and science teacher Jeff Meyer and myself. And the students came up with that billboard east of town on Highway 275, The Power of Green. The installation there in 08 is Retchen's construction with the crane and moving that over there, and NPPD's bucket truck. I have to give a shout out to NPPD too. They supported this program, Wind for Schools, in a lot of ways, with equipment and help and some grants too early on. They did a great job, and OPPD was very supportive as well. The public power system was just very supportive in helping with this program, and they do a great job. Loop City Public Schools, At the time we put this in, it was Carolyn Winchester was the superintendent, and that's her with Jerry Hudgens and Joel Jacobs. Joel Jacobs, you can see him on the right, was the assistant director of the Wind Application Center at the university. And part of the program was the university was required to have somebody engaged, involved with all these projects. And Joel was the guy helping install nearly every one of these. So that part of the deal was they get hands-on training, and he did a great job. Creighton Community School up in Knox County again, the turbine out south of the school. Crofton Bluffs Wind Farm being built right down there. So just like Cedar Rapids and Tilden and the others, they get to see nearby firsthand what utility scale, commercial size wind farms that they're learning about in school applied to the real world. And this is the same here at the Crofton area. Same goes for Bloomfield. You look north from the Bloomfield School, and it is the Elkhorn Ridge Wind Project up there. This was the superintendent, or the staff and the school board, NPPD, myself, and the university folks there, and the students ran that entire dedication themselves that day and did a fantastic job. And there's Joel Jacobs installing the data logging system. Laurel Concord, this was a local contractor that installed that machine. Norfolk, they put theirs in a little bit later, used their own equipment to install it on what's called a hinge pole, tip that up. The lower left photo there is NPPD's Energy Center along 275 on the south side of Norfolk, and it's a great energy center. They did a super job there. SkyStream towers on 3 different heights to compare the wind speed. Bancroft Rosalie is another really good partner, a very good program up there. And West Point is interesting. West Point, if you look at the upper right slide there, you see the SkyStream. Off to the right of that is their alternative energy learning center, and it has solar panels on the top. Inside is this great big monitor that's showing real time how much is being generated, how much is being saved, what the cost is, etc. And that is where the school board meets. They use that as a school board office meeting. Logan View over at Hooper, down the road a ways from there. Diller Odell was one of the first 4 schools. This is Superintendent Mike Meyerly, physical science, Terry Arnold as the, Superintendent Meyerly, physical science instructor, Terry Arnold, in the science class, and out there under the SkyStream. And then just west of Odell is the Steel Flat 75 megawatt wind farm, which again, real world stuff. Meridian Public at Dakin, the guy down there is technology instructor Terry Smith. He's a wind senator. And what that means is Kid Wind, a national program, puts on a conference every year for school teachers to come. And he went out to that, gather up a ton of information and materials to bring back to the school down there, Meridian Public in Dakin. Great job. Superior down the road, they were installing theirs right next to the track. And there it is west of the school. Papillion La Vista, interesting. The civics and government class took it upon themselves to pursue being part of this program. They called NREL directly. NREL called me. So they went directly to NREL, and then I found out about it secondhand, and then they lobbied the school board, that class did, to get this project in. So this was a very unique project. Norris Public Schools, I believe it was the Voc Ag teacher that led the charge on this one. And here's number 25, Raymond Central Public, just north of Lincoln. That upper left photo was 2010. We were looking at doing something there, but they had such a big construction project going on out there that they had to wait. So in December last year, there's Jerry Hudgens and I and Superintendent Hall out there identifying a site. And science teacher Pam Rasmussen, she was one of the first science teachers in 2007, I believe, to contact me when the program was made public. And so that finally got up and going. We held a teacher training seminar or workshop out in Kearney in 2011, and about 14 of these schools came in, gathered up materials. We had a National Energy Education Development speaker, the guy standing next to me there. He came in, presented a workshop. NPBD was on the program. Chad Johnson did a great job presenting, and they picked up a lot of materials. The lower right photo is University of Nebraska electrical engineering instructor and students with the Wind Energy Bright Lights poster. We have a poster session at our wind conferences sometimes, and there were about 20 of the electrical engineering folks there with these great poster. I mean, they come up with some of these fantastic ideas on power electronics and how to improve the system. And so for all the attendees at the Wind Conference, they could go out there in the lobby area and visit, and a lot of the NPPD, OPPD folks were especially interested in these. And this was Wind Energy Bright Lights. It's science classes that come into the university, if I remember it right, to learn about and test their own designs in these small wind tunnels. You get a break from me again. This is actually a community college, Owens Community College, going to showing installation of a wind turbine. Good, that was fun. Real quick, Central Community College has its own SkyStream over at the Hastings campus. Dean of Applied Technology there, Alan Hartley, mentioned that, Dean of Trade and Industry Programs, points out that it's available for all the campuses, Columbus, Grand Island, and so forth, for training. Northeast Community College, I serve on their advisory committee. Wind technician, they had the first in the state, Associate Applied Science degree. Southeast Community College has a very comprehensive generation operations program, and wind is included. They mentioned salaries starting for their program graduates, 43 to 64,000. Nebraska, or Western Nebraska Community College has a wind energy technician program, and Metropolitan Community College has a sustainable energy technology program that's focused mainly on solar. Real quick, at Wind Power 2014, there was this wind energy competitions. Kansas State is the one college nearby that was in on that. They had to design miniature wind turbines and be tested by an NREL wind tunnel there. It was very impressive. I show a listing of all these different jobs. I've kind of mentioned it. I'll mention at the bottom there, meteorology, degrees in computer science, aerodynamics, atmospheric science, math, and so on. If you hit the 20% wind vision that DOE came out with in 2008, you'd have about 175,000 jobs by 2030 in operations, construction, and manufacturing. A couple of important sources of information: American Wind Energy Association, Distributed Wind Energy Association, National Renewable Energy Lab, U.S. Department of Energy, Nebraska Energy Office, Database of Renewable Energy Incentives, and the Nebraska Wind and Solar Conference. And don't forget about that, please. Go there, October 29 and 30 at La Vista. Theme is Turning Challenges into Nebraska Opportunities. On behalf of the Nebraska, or the American Corn Growers Foundation, welcome to the WIND program. Thank you. Let's think renewable energy. U.S. energy security, American jobs, and a little Latin here, Carpe Ventum, seize the wind. There's opportunity in the air. Thank you very much. I have a few of the cards for the wind conference here you can pick up if you're interested as well.
I just have a quick question. I know that Nebraska is a huge migratory route, and I know that when I lived in California, lots of American eagles, golden eagles, peregrine falcons along the Altamont Pass. So
Altamont.
yeah, and I know that they're trying to design new turbines. I know to prevent those deaths, but I was just wondering, I know site placement is a big deal to protect migratory species. What's being done in Nebraska?
Well, and every one of our wind conferences, we have the Nebraska wildlife folks from the university there, and they present a workshop. So they talk about all these issues, and the American Wind Energy Association has done a number of task forces on just exactly what you're asking about. Altamont Pass, worst possible place. They could have put up those old design turbines. They were lattice work tower structures, and just the kind of thing raptors were going to build their nests in. And then, of course, taken off from the nest right up. I mean, hate to laugh about it, but it was a very poor design, even though it was a great wind site. So there's a lot being done to site projects out of the pathways of the migratory birds. Look, birds do hit these wind turbines. I know they're looking at colors now of the blades and so forth, but just so you know, to put it in perspective, more birds are killed by house cats every year than anything else. Next are car windshields, and next to that are high-rise buildings in cities.
Yeah, but I'm thinking of like the sandhills, the crane population that comes through Nebraska and some of those kind of species.
Well, I think everybody's paying attention to that. As far as I know, all the developers are sensitive to that, as are the public power folks and anyone involved. They know those are issues, and they should be, and so they're paying attention to it. Thank you for that.
Folks, we've got at least 2 or 3 more minutes for more questions if you have. If you're listening and viewing off-site, remember you can use the chat box through WebEx or one of our ELS staff members who may be in the room with you if you have questions.
I'll throw out one question.
Sure.
All of these were horizontal axis. Are there, I've seen some in experimental that are vertical axis turbine.
Yeah.
Is there, correct. Is there a reason that there doesn't seem to be much research going on those types?
I am not an engineer, mechanical or electrical. I can't claim to be an expert on the design of these types of machines, but I've seen them. I've seen them at the trade shows every year, and I'm not going to talk about any specific product or brand, but my sense was needing the lightweight material that could spin around like that. And I was thinking about Nebraska ice and snow, and how efficient is that compared to blades that go like that? I just can't say. I don't know. I know there's some places working on them. I just am not enough of a technical person to be able to give you a good answer. I'm sorry. Question back up here.
What do you think the average citizen can do in Nebraska to get our wind energy production anywhere close to matching our wind energy potential?
Well, 2 things, I guess. One thing is to push on the U.S. Congress, and of course that would include, I guess, our Nebraska delegation, to hone in on the wind production tax credit. It needs to be extended. Even no matter what we do in Nebraska as a state, the biggest driver is the federal production tax credit which is over 2 cents. And so without that, we're going to see a real stagnation in projects being developed. It expired December 31st. It needs to be extended, and I guess we all know that Congress is what it is in terms of not or getting things done, and so hopefully they'll come together and extend it again. Hopefully it would be more than, I'd love to see it permanent. I'd like to see the ethanol RFS permanent, just like oil incentives. That's probably not going to happen, but a 5 or 10 year extension. Well, policies in Nebraska too. There's been, the legislature's done a number of policies over the years to help improve the environment for Nebraska, starting in 07 to be able to get things going. But the other states, we have to face this. The other states around us are ahead of us. Nebraska came late to the party, in my opinion, and I think that's some of the other states moved faster, and you know, so we just have to play catch up, and we can do more. Thank you.
Okay, there are a couple of questions that came in from the off-site, so I'm going to try to merge the two. First part of it, are there any incentives for a person or a small community to help with design and installation of a wind system? And second of all, deals with encouragement overall in wind development.
Well, as far as incentives, you know, I don't know if you were, USDA has grants for putting in projects, and farmers and landowners that would qualify for those projects, that might include local developers or so forth. That would be a stream to those folks to be involved, I would think. U.S. Department of Energy, I believe, and other federal agencies have resources for doing research and that sort of thing. So I think people should look into all those possible opportunities. And I would say contact the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and ask them sources of doing research for new designs and that sort of thing. I don't know about state programs for that. Thank you. Okay.
Very quickly, what are the main couple of items that could be done to encourage more wind development in 1 minute?
In my opinion, the federal production tax credit should be made permanent, at least extended, get us on a level playing field with the other sources of energy that already have a lot of these incentives, and that would keep things moving. Without that, things grind down, and investors, and that includes people that invest in those manufacturing facilities I talked about, they want certainty. Why does Europe have so much? Because they have certainty. They think long term. They think in terms of 50 years down the road, not the next election cycle. They think in terms of getting policies that will facilitate not only manufacturing and industrial development, but exports. Germany, Holland, those they do that. They are, and they don't do it based on the cheapest labor or anything else. They do it with a very strategic plan long term. So I think the federal production tax credit, and then incentives that will drive manufacturing, domestic manufacturing.
Thank you so much, Dan McGuire. We appreciate your wisdom and your experience.
Pleasure.
On a topic that should be important to all Nebraskans. And don't forget, first Thursday next month, we'll continue our Sustainability Leadership Presentation Series live from MCC, and I hope to see you there or hear you listening. Thank you.